My name is Kimberly Tice, and I'm the Executive Director of Ohio AEYC, and we're really excited that you joined us today. If you're new to us, we hold these meetings weekly. We'd love you to join whenever your schedule allows. At times, we have guest speakers like we do today with Judith, and most weeks we talk about issues that are impacting your work. You're also invited to become a member of our Early Childhood Educator Coalition, which is meeting tonight. If you want that information, reach out to us. And we also are having Family Child Care Advisory Council meetings that will be meeting the third Wednesday of the month. And in those meetings, we go a little more deeply and are working on 3 goals that we've identified.
Hello.
Hello. And the first goal is that we want to, and this is a long-term goal, but increase investments to ensure equitable compensation and benefits for early care and education professionals that are comparable with K-3 educators who have similar education and responsibilities. We are working on making sure there's policies and practices to improve the financial sustainability of both center-based and home-based settings. And also, we want to ensure family child care providers are equitably included in all efforts to improve quality and increase access to high quality programs for families. So reach out to us if you want to know more about any of these groups. But we're so thankful that Judith Santmeyer, the Chief Operating Officer of OCCRRA, is joining us today to provide updates on phase 1 of the stabilization grants and to provide you with the latest information on phase 2 and 3 of the grants. Please add your questions to the chat box or the Q&A. We do have a large number of attendees today. We'll answer as many questions as possible on the live call, and we'll do our best to get answers to share with you in a follow-up email if we're unable to get to all of the questions. So welcome, Judith, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So for some folks, this part of this presentation, if you've already attended a phase 1 presentation, might feel a little redundant, so it might be reinforcing some of those thoughts. But we will be covering phase 1, phase 2 that we're actually in as well. And then we'll also cover reconciliation type information. So we'll go ahead and get started because we have lots of information to cover and then having time then for question and answers. So the background for the stabilization subgrant, this was made available through the American Rescue Plan Act. There were 2 state approvals that helped move these funds forward. So the first one was through the Ohio Controlling Board. The first $161 million that was a part of phase 1, and then House Bill 169 that is $608 million that is for the future phases that we have. So definitely those pieces are instrumental in how we are able to provide these funding to programs. The funding organization is the Department of Job and Family Services, so they set the parameters of these funds through manual procedure letters. And OCCRRA is the administrative organization, so we handle the applications, payments, and reconciliation process for the different phases. So with that, and I know Kim has mentioned this as well, we have multiple resources on our website to help guide through the process. And so on the link she has provided, you're able to get the copies of the MPLs that we have, as well as multiple guidance documents and user guides that are going to help you through this process. So the guidance documents, and we have one for phase 1, the reconciliation, and phase 2. Those are really more of the details and the rationales and some of the terminology pieces. The user guides are really when you're in the system, that step-by-step process with screenshots of how to complete those different pieces. So those will be very important to you as you're working through this process. And so I encourage you, if you haven't already, to print those, access those, because we'll reference them during the presentation today. So we start with phase one of stabilization. So that opened on December 1st, 2021, and that window is open until May 31st of 2022. All of the applications, reconciliations are available through the organization dashboard of the Ohio Professional Registry. If you find that you may not have the dashboard access that you need to access the applications, please let us know, and you can do that by emailing support@occra.org with the license number so that we can make sure you have the access that you need to complete the process. In phase one, we have 3 subgrant types. So we have operating, new pandemic costs, workforce recruitment and retention, and access development. And we'll talk more about what are those activities that are included in that as well in just a few minutes. The grant allocation formula in phase one was based on that program type, and then that determined the subgrants that each program type was eligible for, and then the licensing capacity for centers and ODE programs serving publicly funded children as of November 28th, 2021. When we then fast forward to phase two, that license capacity is as of January 28th, 2022. This next chart provides us the phase one piece about which programs are eligible for which subgrants. So if you're a center type A and type B, you are eligible for all of the subtypes. Approved day camps have all but technology access. In-home aides are operating and new pandemic costs and school aid support. And ODE programs serving publicly funded children are operating, new pandemic costs, and workforce recruitment and retention. As I mentioned, as we're in the system looking at the application, much of the information that we could, we tried to pre-populate. It didn't make a lot of sense for us to ask for this information when it was already in the system, so we tried to provide that time-saving piece. We also will require demographic information of the person who's completing the application. This is a federal requirement, and so we ask that that person who is able to complete the application as well as the payment portal information is the one that opens and completes that process. If you find that maybe an application was opened in error to someone that should not complete that process, please let us know at support@occra.org because we can close that application so it can be opened and tagged with the appropriate demographic information. The fields that you'll see in the application, so in phase one, we have the maximum funding amount. And so in phase one, it works out slightly different than in phase two. The maximum funding amount is set for each subgrant that you're allowed for. And then you'll be asked to enter a requested funding amount. So you can request the maximum funding amount if you believe you'll have expenses that will spend all of those dollars allotted to your program. You can enter an amount less than the maximum funding amount. Or if you prefer to waive a certain subgrant, you can enter a 0 in that particular area. Phase two, and we'll get to some of those changes as well, that changes slightly because your maximum funding amount is a total dollar amount, and then you tell us how you want to distribute that amongst the subgrants available. There's a two-step process in the application. So once you complete the first page, it'll say, yes, you've completed step 1 of 2, and then it'll take you to the payment portal. The payment portal does 2 activities. One is it completes a substitute W-9, so it's asking for tax ID information. And secondly is bank account information. So this is the first time where we are offering ACH transactions to organizations. And so completing that information will pay in that way. We do have that if your program maybe does not have a bank account associated with it, you can check to have a paper check sent with this payment. As we're moving into phase 2, it's important to note that you only need to complete the payment portal one time. So if you've already done that in phase 1, it won't ask you to do that again in phase 2. It'll give you a success message that you've submitted the application. So I'm just going to pause there just for a moment to check in to see if we have any initial questions on what we've shared so far.
I'm muted. Not surprisingly, we have some questions about the technology category. Do you want to take that question now or later?
We'll actually go into the different activities here momentarily, so I'll hold on to that one.
And I'll wait for the other one when we go into that activity as well.
Awesome, thank you. So now we're getting into the particular subgrants and their activities. So in the application, you'll be asked to select the activities that you wish to do. So under the operating new pandemic costs subgrant, you have things like personnel costs, the ongoing costs, rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, facility maintenance, purchasing PPE, those sanitizers, all those pieces that we also saw in the pandemic support payment grant as well. In workforce recruitment and retention, we're looking at those items related to increased wages, benefits, and there's a list of benefits there. You can select a sign-on and retention bonuses, ongoing premium or hazard pay, transportation costs to and from work. The one item I will note is that if you do select a sign-on or retention bonuses, there is additional information in the manual procedure letter that talks about a retention policy as well as an agreement that the employer has to have with the employee. And so I would have you take a look at that because there's specifics about what that agreement should include. And then in the access development is broken down into 3 sections. You are not required to complete all 3 sections. You will tell us which activities you wish to do. Also in phase 1 for access development, the amount allotted is for the whole section. So if you only choose 1 or 2, you can allot that among those 2, the number of activities selected. So we're looking in access development about increasing classrooms, operating hours. And we're looking at those age groups around infant, toddler, school age, or care for children with special needs. And then the operating hours include things like non-traditional hours, weekdays that are 7 p.m. to 6 a.m., between 12 a.m. Saturday to 6 a.m. Monday. So the technology access, that piece is increasing technology access by purchasing technology and new equipment for learning and development. So that is a very important component to that overall technology piece, is looking at what are those, equipment, software, Wi-Fi service that's going to look at that learning and development piece. And then addressing school age learning gaps and social emotional needs would be that 3rd part. So I'm going to pause there for a moment because I think that would be a good place to talk about the potential technology questions.
Always forget to unmute. So here are some of the questions. One would be Bright Wheel subscription payments. These are asking if any of these are allowable.
So when you're looking at the, software, I know we've used Osmo, those pieces that are learning and development specific would be allowable.
But Bright Wheel's not learning and development specific is what you're saying. Correct? Am I understanding you correctly?
No, I'm saying if Bright Wheel is used for that purpose, that would be allowable.
Gotcha. ABC Mouse subscription payments.
Yes, that is a learning and development.
If they have purchased new tablets, can they also purchase tablet cases?
No, we're mainly looking at those actual hardware, software, those types of pieces.
Okay.
This would also include, we've had prior questions about furniture that the technology may sit on is not included with these funds.
Okay. Headphones for use with tablets or laptops?
Yes.
And do you have any examples of approved software?
I think we've discussed a few here already, but we're looking for those items that meet the learning and development. So it's difficult to provide an exhaustive list of that because there are so many, but that would be what we would measure any of those purchases by.
Okay. And I'm actually going to, the next question, I'm just going to ask other people to add into the chat box if they are aware, because this kind of goes with you can't provide an exhaustive list, but I do think it's a good question if they've already gotten approval for something. So someone is looking for any other items or learning toys that would be approved of the technology grant that would be acceptable. So if you have ideas to share, go ahead and share that. And then a second question is, if in round one subgrant 2, if the retention bonus was based on the gross amount, or is that up to the program to decide? If they're paying retention bonuses, is that based on the gross amount?
Yes. So if I'm understanding the question, so yes, if you're whatever that retention bonus that you're paying, the entire amount can be claimed.
Okay. And then if they're getting computers and iPads,
Mhm.
would the setup of those devices be included in the grant if they had a tech expert help them?
So we typically have not included the technology support. I don't know if what may be needed to be loaded on that. It's really the pieces that are provided in the guidance document would be where I would point them.
Okay. Under facility maintenance, can it be used for fluorescent lighting for replacement of fluorescent lighting?
So the
Replacement of fluorescent lighting to LED lighting.
to LED lighting. So that particular piece, I would have them reference the facility maintenance part of the guidance document.
Yeah, I think because they're referencing facility maintenance and they can't figure out if it is allowable. And then I think that, so would they email support? Could anybody give them any other clarification? Because it looks like they've already referenced that.
Sure. So typically you're talking about facility maintenance components, which the replacement of lighting would be. Typically when you're going from fluorescent to LED, that would be a component that you'd need to reference that in the maintenance piece of why that change needed to occur.
Great. So then two along those lines, I just missed that question. It just flew by me. Smart TVs and STEM toys.
The smart TVs, yes, for the technology access if used with children for learning and development needs.
Mm-hmm. Furniture replacement or dishwasher.
I'd have them take a look at the PPE section for the dishwasher, and furniture is not included in phase 1. Okay. We'll talk a little bit more about some phase 2 items, depending on what they're talking about for furniture.
And if someone is a home provider, if they use the time space percentage, is roof replacement allowable?
I'd have them take a look at, it's in the guidance for reconciliation. So it's in the, for roof, I'd have them take a look at the non-allowable items because there's a reference about defining major renovation. So I'd have them take a look there.
Okay. And if they were purchasing a printer copier and used it to make paper games for children, would that be allowable?
Yes, meeting that learning and development
Okay.
definition.
All right. Well, let's let you go on. I'm sure I didn't cover everyone, but I think I got to the majority of them.
Sure. Okay, so as I mentioned, you'll be required to select the activities in each of the subgrants. We do caution folks that you only pick the activities that you believe you will have expenses in because those items that are selected will be pre-populated into your reconciliation. The reconciliation won't allow a $0 amount for an activity. So if you find that you haven't spent funds in a particular activity, we ask that you email support@occra.org so that we can return the application for additional action needed so it can be edited to correct for those activities that you'll believe you'll have expenses for. So when we've talked a little bit about allowable expenses, and again, the NPL, the guidance document, is also a helpful place to look. In the guidance document, it also provides samples of the documentation that would be required based on the expenses that are selected there. So I'd have folks take a look there. The other important part is to consider the expenses, what we call incurred dates. And so if you worked with us on the pandemic support payment grants, this was very similar. For each phase, there are time periods that are provided that the expenses need to occur. So for personnel, this would be the pay periods when the time is actually worked. And for others, it's when the dates of the receipts, dates of payments that are made for bonuses need to fall within these timeframes. So the dates that you're currently seeing, these are phase 1 dates. So operating new pandemic costs, it goes back to January 31st of 2020 through June 30th of 2022. For workforce recruitment and retention and access development, those are going forward type expenses. We're looking at a time period for phase 1 of December 1st of 2021 through June 30th of 2022. Now, the phase 2 and phase 3 manual procedure letters also provides the expense periods for those grants as well. So if we're looking in comparison to what we're seeing here, the operating new pandemic costs for phase 2, that period is July 1 of 2021 to June 30th of 2022. For workforce retention and recruitment, access development, mental health workforce and family supports, those expense periods are February 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2022. And then it continues to roll forward then with phase 3 as all subgrants would have the same expense period of July 1, 2022 to December 31st, 2022. So again, these are those timelines that the expenses need to occur within for each phase. Now, in our reconciliation guidance, we provide a note because the expense periods overlap essentially for phase 1 and phase 2. And so in that, we have provided specific guidance that we ask that you don't use the exact same expense for phase 1 and phase 2. What this means is if you're using a personnel cost, for example, you wouldn't use the same pay period and person to represent that expense in phase 1 and then turn around and submit the same documentation for phase 2. You would use a staggering, a different time period, for those expenses. So that's what that's saying. Some folks are confusing that if I use that activity in phase one of utilizing personnel costs, I can't use that again in phase two, but that is not the case. So again, the selecting of the activities becomes important in each subgrant, as we've already discussed. Taking time to kind of get that lining up with maybe some expenses that you'll use for the subgrants will help you complete that process. So now we have some non-allowable expenses. So the purchase of a new program is not possible with these funds. The construction or major renovation or remodeling is not included. And to get a deeper definition there, as I mentioned in the reconciliation guidance document, it provides the federal guidance of defining major renovation. So I'd have you take a look there if you're looking at those facility maintenance type expenses. For these funds, we are not able to utilize gift cards. The feds have a definition around gift cards that the funds are only spent when the gift card balance is zero. So we are not able to monitor gift cards that would be handed out to make sure that those balances are zero for all those funds to be spent. And then as the technology access component, as we've talked at length, being that very specific to learning and development, gaming systems and their accessories are not allowable with these funds. So I will pause there for a moment before we dive into reconciliation to check to see if there's any questions.
I think we lost Kim. Kim, are you back with us?
I am back, but we lost.
Oh, okay.
I was able to copy the questions right before I left, but I may have missed some. One is a general question of how is the money allocated for the different program types? And then Lisa, if there were any other questions after that, I didn't see them because I had to sign off and sign in again.
Sure.
Okay, so there are charts with each of the manual procedure letters that describe the amount of funds provided to each program type. And so it's incremental based on the number of children that are served. And then I know that there is some feedback around some of the maximum funding amounts that are under review by ODJFS and under consideration for future phases.
Thank you.
Yep.
Lisa, were there other questions I might have missed when I was off?
Yes, yes. As a family childcare provider, this is just looking for clarification. Can we use same person since we are the only ones here, but submit for a different time period?
That is exactly correct. So when you're looking at those expenses between phase one and phase two, yes, it would be for the same person, but for a different time period. And so that would be why it would be allowable in both phases.
Okay. And, sorry, my screen just jumped. Is an egress window an allowable expense to open up another space for family childcare?
Yes, so looking at those facility maintenance would be where I would include that piece.
Sally Jo just asked, are purchases of curriculum and assessment tools allowable?
Not in phase one, but we'll talk about where there is some opportunity in phase two.
Okay. Destiny may have put this in before, maybe we missed it. Is a furnace replacement acceptable? Not furniture, furnace.
That is not included in these funds.
Thank you. Just trying to make sure I'm not missing any because they're it's moving kind of fast. Would here's a clarification to her furnace. Would furnace replacement to switch from fuel oil to natural gas be acceptable for a family childcare maintenance?
Furnace is not included as an expense.
You're welcome, Destiny. I think I have everything. Kim, I see you're on again. Can you see any that maybe I missed?
No, there is some question about the dates, but I think that, I don't know if Judith, I think that's all included in the guidance documents of when expenses are allowable.
Yes.
Because the question is, will expenses be approved for the months prior to 12/1, since these funds were approved prior to that date? But in each phase, it tells you when the expenses need to have been occurred, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I think you can go on and we'll stop again and answer questions. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right, so now we're going to spend a little bit of time on reconciliation. So it is possible, and talking about this first bullet, one reconciliation per phase, including any additions occurring during the application period. So what that means is in the application process, you can have more than one application. So up until the maximum funding amount. So let's say, for example, when you were completing your first application, you maybe waived a certain subgrant or didn't apply for the full amount. And so you can go back in and complete that process as long as it happens before you open the reconciliation in May 30th, 2022. Once you open the reconciliation, it will tell you if you have any unspent funds because it's asking you to acknowledge that you're not going to access them. Because once that reconciliation opens, then those funds would be forfeited. So that's why it's giving you that warning in case you need to complete an application before that happens. All of the reconciliations are site specific, just like the application. So if you're part of a multi-site program, you must apply under each site. You must reconcile for each site. All of the programs will be completing a reconciliation expense report. So as I mentioned, the expense report is going to pre-populate with all those activities that you've checked in the application. So when you open that, and that is located in the exact same spot where the applications are. So I would caution you because you'll see stabilization grant application, grant reconciliation, typically under that to make sure you're in the right spot as you open the reconciliation expense report. Those activities will pre-populate, and then it will ask you to enter actual expense amounts per activity. So let's say, for example, you are in operating, you've selected personnel costs. So you would take all of your documentation around personnel costs, subtotal that up, and put one amount, dollars and cents. We're not able to round with these, unfortunately, and tell us how much you spent on that activity. And then you'll do that for each activity you've selected. We've already talked about the fact that the reconciliation won't accept a zero. So you will need to reach out to us to open the application again so that you can make those edits if you find that you need to. And so that's the first part. All the programs do that. 20% of the programs will be selected for a desk review. So all of that documentation utilized to enter your expense amounts, you'll be notified, yes, your program has been selected for a desk review. You will go back into the expense report record, and there'll be a upload function that you can just upload that documentation to that same expense report for all of the amounts that have been claimed on that. Then you'll send it back to us. One of the pieces is that the reconciliation for the first phase must be submitted before accessing the funds for the future phases. So we'll get into phase 2, but since that just opened February 1st, you'll want to submit the reconciliation, and then that phase 2 application will appear for you to be able to complete that. With the documentation part to this, we've provided some additional information. And again, the sample documentation is in the guidance documents for the applications as well as the reconciliations to help you plan for those, what you'll need in advance. So expense documentation includes documents typically from third-party vendors for goods or services that show order and payment information. Both pieces are needed, and sometimes depending on the vendor, and I think of Amazon when this comes to mind, depending on, there might be a couple pieces of documentation for an order. One might be a shipping type document that does not have information related to how much the order cost, your payment of that. So just be cognizant of that as you're pulling those items together, that we will need that information if selected for a desk review. Examples of these pieces are receipts, purchase orders with payment information if your program uses a purchase order system, paid invoices, payroll journals if your program utilizes a third-party vendor for payroll. Payroll is very unique. We have many settings using different types of payroll systems. So some are third-party, which are external. Some might be internal. So that documentation might look more of timesheets and pay stubs. For our family childcare folks, looking at checks that you would have written to yourself, memoed as far as what they were for, to make sure that we have a paper trail along the way. We ask that you clearly label the documentation. This will help a great deal on the desk review part if selected. If you include the subgrant and the activity, that will help us quickly be able to say, okay, all of these items were subtotaled for this amount, to be able to reconcile that. We also, just like we did with pandemic support payment grants, we will work with programs if we've reviewed the documentation in the desk review, find something that, maybe an item was not in the date period that we've talked about, or it's not an allowable item. We will work with the program to try to substitute allowable purchases in those sections. Also in our documentation, if you're working with a multi-site program, it is possible to provide that documentation, an invoice, if you will, that has information about multiple sites. A lot of times they're in bulk purchasing type scenarios. So providing us with that clear allocation of how much each program received is going to help us understand how much was included in that documentation. So I will pause there for any reconciliation questions before we go into phase 2 and 3. Sorry, Kim, I think you're on mute.
Of course I'm on mute. Oh. Okay, so for reconciliation for wages, do they need to upload documents, and how would they upload for upcoming months? So go ahead.
Sure. So the documentation that will be submitted to OCCRRA is only if your program is submitted for desk review, would be that case. And then I think we're then looking at the time period, right? So looking at those expenses for the time period that we've reconciled. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So then a question comes up. For example, if their technology that they purchased is over the allotted amount, will it reconcile?
Yes. So in the reconciliation piece, you can enter an amount that is more than what you requested in the application. What it will do, though, is that when it totals that amount, it will cap at that maximum amount. So you'll still be able to enter it, which is helpful, so that it ties to the documentation in case the desk review is warranted. That way we can tie that out. But just know that that's how the system will treat those overages.
And so another question, if they enter $1,000 flat with no cents, is that okay? If that's what they, if that was the amount.
Yes, there are some types expenses that will not have a sense. And one that comes to mind for me is if you've selected background checks, typically it's a flat rate, right? That you're multiplying by however many background checks you had. So that would definitely be one that we wouldn't require dollars and cents. If there's others, it's difficult for us to know, which one might be a rounding component versus that's how much it actually was other than background checks. So we might ask a question just to clarify that, but as long as you tell us, yes, that's how much the actual expense was, it didn't have any sense, then we're good to proceed.
If they're family childcare and they're choosing to pay themselves, is there specific wording that you want in the memo line? Is it payroll, paid myself, or is there specific wording that you're looking for?
I think the kind of the easiest way to go is whatever you're paying yourself for, use the similar language that's in the manual procedure letter or the guidance document. So in the memo, if it's just the personnel costs, maybe operating personnel costs, that way it's just a really clean way for us to tie that back. If it's one of the retention bonuses or sign-on bonuses, just writing that in the memo line so we can kind of follow along with that. And then I would note that for family childcare, for sign-on or the retention bonus component, also having the policy and agreement would be into play. So we understand that you're saying, yes, I want to commit to continuing services for 6 months, so that it would follow that MPL guidance.
Great. And then just a couple of questions that are more related that were missed on allowable expenses. To clarify, can computers or laptops be purchased for teachers to facilitate learning and development?
Yes, as long as we can support that learning and development, that's what our connection is going to be.
And is carpet an allowable expense for one of the rooms?
Yes, so I would look at the facility maintenance around the flooring piece.
Okay. Let's see, those were some ones I'd copied and pasted. Oh my gosh, more came in. Why don't I let you continue on?
Sure.
And then Judith has agreed to stay a little longer if we need to, and I'll try to copy and paste these questions and we'll try to get to them closer to the end.
Wonderful. So next we'll talk about the manual procedure letter that has phase 2 and 3 included. The child care manual procedure letter, if you haven't already seen it, it is also posted on OCCRRA's website with the rest of the resources to take a look. So phases 2 and 3, again, it was approved through the legislative appropriation. The application window for phase 2 has opened, so we're looking at that time frame of February 1st through May 31st of 2022. And then wanted to talk specifically about some refinements that differ between phase 1 and phase 2. So the first one, there's additional funds for program type. So you can see that in the MPL, and it's only the concept of a lump sum. So programs will be able to select the amount of funds for each subgrant. You do not and are not required to have an amount in each subgrant. It's really based on business need where you want to plug those funds in with the associated activities. There is some additions around the activity section. So in the workforce recruitment and retention, the bullet is funding recruitment activities. And so that would be pieces like needing to post maybe in a newspaper or Indeed, looking at those expenses and pulling those in because those are recruitment type activities. You might attend a job fair to recruit for your program. All of those pieces would be in that component. And again, we're talking, this would be phase 2 items. We also see the addition of mental health supports. So mental health supports were always a part of the vision for these funds, but since the initial funding that came through, there really wasn't enough to kind of spread across 4 subgrants. So it was held until more of these funds could be released. So you'll see that in a couple different areas. One is in access development. And so there's the addition of expansion of programming to include therapeutic childcare. And so that particular component, programs will be identified by a community mental health agency to partner with them. And so there will be expenses associated with implementing that therapeutic childcare. And so that is included in access development. And then the new subgrant, the mental health workforce and family support subgrant, adds mental health pieces as well. So looking at this for centers and ODE publicly funded, there is a new pilot, which is the last bullet around the concept of the mental health bridge. So it is assisting with costs related to HIPAA compliant spaces to allow for services to be given on site. And so looking at those pieces are in that pilot program. There are additional components, and this is where the phase 2 guidance document will be very helpful because it provides the details around the coaching and training, the types of experiences for children, looking at those program materials. This is a component that if you're looking for things around curriculum for social emotional needs, that would be included in that area, as well as there is a component for inviting safe spaces around this mental health piece. And so there could be some furniture that would be associated with that as well. So depending on how you're using that would be where I would check that piece. And then there's also some other family engagement materials, those program materials that really have those social emotional connections are going to be coming into play here. The other piece that will look different is that there's an additional certification. So the certifications are those check boxes that are at the bottom of the application. And there is a new one because there, for the personal protective equipment, there was also included in House Bill 169 was the concept, and it's in the operating subgrant when it's talking about purchasing protective equipment. It's either that it's approved by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health or authorized for use by the United States Food and Drug Administration, including under emergency use authorization. And so the certification is going to say if I'm going to make these purchases of PPE, that I agree that, you know, I'm going to purchase those that are approved by either one of those agencies. So just want to make folks aware of that change. So I will pause there if there's any phase 2 or 3 questions.
Yes. The guidance document mentions hazard pay. Are there any special guidance for this, similar to the retention agreements? And then there's a 2-part of that question, so I'll let you answer that first part.
So there, and guidance in as far as an amount or things of that nature is at the discretion of the program, as far as how they would set that and have that work in their program setting.
Would they, so if they chose to do that, do they need a retention agreement for hazard pay?
No, just for the bonus parts.
Okay. And related to that, is it allowable to pay this back to July 2021 or just going forward?
pay would the hazard pay.
Yes.
The hazard pay would be would fall in the workforce recruitment and retention. So I would have you use those dates associated with that. So for phase one, you're going to start December 1st, 2021 through June 30th. And then for phase two, it would start February 1st.
Judith, you amaze me keeping all these dates at the tip of your tongue. Anyways, next question. If they are selected for a desk review, what is the turnaround time with that? And do you have additional staff to process those if needed?
Sure. So the just to be clear, the desk review does not affect the timeline for being able to access phase two funds, because I'm sure that is of a concern. We do have folks and a team here that reviews the desk review items, and we'll be reaching out with any questions, working through that process with programs.
So does it hold up their payment if they're selected for a desk review?
No.
Okay. And if someone, this is close to, but a little different than the question about family childcare providers paying themselves. If they're a private preschool, how would they document if they were paying the owner?
There would still need to be some paper trail, so including that in personnel costs, putting that through the payroll type system, writing that person a check, those types of things to document the paper trail for that.
Okay. This is related to rent.
Mhm.
So for rent, would you need a copy of the lease, or would a bank statement showing the ACH payment suffice?
Yeah, that's a good question. So any of those pieces, and typically when you're looking at the rent, insurances, things of that nature, we need to have either a monthly statement, a bill of some sort. For rent, we will accept the lease agreement to substantiate the amount and who it's being paid to, that type of thing. And then we would also need, however that payment's being made, if it's credit card, check, understanding that we need both that payment information that occurred.
With material and supply purchases included in the access development category to replenish learning and development toys, materials in the classroom. I'm not sure if I understand the question. Would material/supply purchases be included in the access development category? So I guess those purchases would be used to replenish learning and development toys in the classroom.
So for access development, I would caution folks because you need to be doing the activity associated with that. So if you're not expanding the number of classrooms, serving new age groups of children, the fact that those materials and supply costs are listed there, it's not an activity that you're completing. So very similar with, the mental health. It's the intent that you're using it for mental health components, and those are allowable expenses under that. So I would just caution folks that I think, yes, as long as you're doing that activity, then those would apply there.
So related to reconciliation, while submitting the reconciliation, it requested I put at least $1 in each subcategory, even though I did not spend funds in that subcategory. Does that mean my application needs to be changed? I thought the original application just asked for spending in the larger categories.
So, correct. So the application is asking two things. One is what activities you're going to do, and those activities should be tied to what you will have expenses for. So yes, we will need to get the application open so that you can true up what activities you have expenses for, because it won't allow a zero essentially for activities that you didn't complete.
Okay. So in phase 2 and phase 3, under operating costs, can a program choose to use it all for payroll?
Yes.
Okay. And I have some general questions about allocations that I'm going to wait till we get the more specific questions here answered. Can you just give an update on the time frame for people who are waiting for phase 1 payments?
Yes, we're approximately 4 to 6 weeks from the approval date of the application.
Okay. And did I hear you say on the webinar yesterday that you processing them, it's not once a month, it's
Oh no, we're processing them almost every day. As
that's
soon as
what
we
I thought
can.
I heard you say, so I
Yes,
wanted to confirm that.
yes,
Um,
all the time. We're pushing them as quickly as possible.
okay. If a family child care or center-based program that's is working on getting licensed, if they get licensed before the window closes, are they able to apply to use the funds in the previous months?
So I will try to answer this one. So with this piece, when you get licensed, our system of record for this program is OCLQS.
Mhm.
So when you're licensed, you open an OCLQS and then that information gets sent to OCCRRA. So when that occurs, if it is still within the application window, and again, we're looking at May 31st, you would be able to access the funds for that phase, and your license capacity would be as of what OCLQS considers your open date to be.
Okay. For the retention bonus, when it says 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
is that the minimum amount, or like it must be 6 months? Can it be more? Can it be less?
Yes. So it can, the 6 month period is the minimum.
Okay.
Yep.
And of course, this question, is there any possibility that there'll be a 4th phase of grants?
Yeah. So they stated that in the MPL, and it's right above the chart that talks about the expense period. For phase 4, dollar amounts will be issued in another MPL, so there'll be another one issued. But they're looking at a minimum that they'll be equal to phase 3 funds. So what's going to happen is that we're going to assess, once phase 2 and phase 3 have occurred, how much money is left, and that will be included in phase 4.
Okay.
If there is any in addition to what that is.
So for family child care related to mortgage, they're not behind, but can they claim and utilize the mortgage for 2020 expenses?
Yes. So with the phase 1, the operating, as we mentioned, it goes back to January 31st of 2020. So those, and that this would include mortgage, utilities, rent, facility rent. You can go back and claim those months within that expense period.
Great. And if somebody does need to have their categories corrected, like saying, I did not use this subcategory, and they want to get that corrected,
Mhm.
do you know what the turnaround time is for that? Like, is that going to put them at the back of the line for anything, or is there a pretty quick turnaround if it needs to be corrected?
What I would do is, if you're awaiting a payment and needing to do that, I would wait till you get your payment first and then change it before you do your reconciliation.
Really helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yes, so Shannon, I think she already answered this. Yes, you can use it all for payroll or retention. You do not have to use it on mortgage and utilities. Again, I'm going to let you wrap up, and just as we have some questions about allocation that I'll ask at the end, because that's a more general question than specific. So go ahead if you have something, if you have more slides.
Sure. So we've talked about these documents, but again, they are listed here. They're available on OCCRRA's website. So if you go to OCCRRA.org, our landing page right in the middle of the page has a stabilization grant banner. If you click on learn more about stabilization grants, all of these documents are available to you. I encourage you to take a look at those and have them as you're working through these different processes. Also with questions, again, we've been addressing many questions today and we'll have a few more minutes for questions and answers. But after this call, if you have questions, feel free to email support@occra.org. We have a team of folks that are reviewing those and getting responses back. And then we also are engaging our regional childcare resource and referral agencies across the state to assist in this process. And so we want to make sure that everyone who is eligible for these funds are able to access and complete the required pieces. And so the R&Rs will be following up with programs, especially if you have an application in a draft status, or maybe you haven't had a chance to open that yet. They will be inquiring about, do you need assistance, and, moving along in that process.
And we have a number of questions, and I know this doesn't all fall within your authority, but a number of questions about an equitable allotment of how the funds were allocated for phase 2 and 3. You did mention previously that there's some conversations about reviewing that. What can you tell us about how those were determined and for phase 2 and 3?
Well, I will say that, ODJFS is reviewing, they've heard this feedback as well. And so they're reviewing those components for programs and how that might look for future phases.
Yeah. And we are, Ohio AYC is in conversation with ODJFS, and we're hoping to, and OCCRRA and OACCP, and we're hoping to be able to offer a webinar soon to provide more clarity, because we know lots of people have, questions and just want to understand. So, the voices have been heard, and we're trying to move forward to get more information for everyone on that. Let's see, while we were talking, I'm not sure if there's probably more questions. Let me see. I see lots of thank yous, Judith. And if I see this question once, I see it 100 times. If anyone is proud of your retention policy and would like to share it with Ohio AYC, we will send it out as a follow-up to this call, because, everybody seems kind of challenged on that one. And if people don't have to recreate the wheel, if you're willing to share yours, then people could adapt it for their own program. Let's see. Again, lots of thank yous. Another question about carpet, and Judith did answer that and said, yes, that would be allowable for a classroom, childcare room. Judith, you are always so calm and patient. Always good to hear that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Here it was a question. I think they would need to self-determine, but I'll ask it anyways. If they haven't received their phase 1 funds yet, should they front the money to ourselves so we can do a reconciliation and apply for phase 2?
So that is completely up to the business determination of that. You have the expense period, so as long as those expenses fall within that time frame, we would accept it. But definitely understand that for many programs that's not possible. So they would need to await the funds before purchases can occur.
Oh, good. Someone's providing them some advice. If you look on page 6 of the manual procedure letter, it explains what needs to be in the retention policy. That's helpful. I think, as we've talked a lot about on this call, is sometimes it's just you have such little energy and brain cells left. If anybody has developed something that you could adapt, that would be great. So, all right, Judith, I'm going to let you get back to processing those payments and reconciling and but so appreciative not only of you sharing the information, but be willing to take very specific questions, which will really help people. And I know that ODJFS and OCCRRA, their goal is to get this money out the door. Their goal is to get this money spent. And I'm very encouraged, as you said, that, you know, if they are chosen for a desk review for reconciliation and there is something allowable, that your plan is to work with them to find an alternative expense that they can be reimbursed for. So I think
Absolutely.
all of those pieces are very helpful. We appreciate that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. We appreciate the work that you do and look forward to working through and getting the funds to you for these grant opportunities.
Thank you.